If you're an automotive enthusiast like me, chances are you've dreamed of owning certain cars or just driving them. And I've been lucky enough in my life to have done both. But recently I've learned something major, and that is most of these cars are disposable. In fact, a lot of them that people get all excited about will be forgotten in probably 5 years. Now, take a look at this, an S2000. This is my fourth one, and I'm at the place where I believe this is going to be one of those rare Japanese classics. Now, there's a ton of bad things about this car, and there's also some extremely delightful things. And instead of talking about the floor mats or the exhaust tips, I'm gonna go into what I think is a pretty exhaustive review. So get ready. Now, to fully appreciate the S2000, you need to have a bit of a history lesson, and I'm not going to go off the deep end. If you're a motorcycle fanatic or you've been around the block, you'll know that Honda has been widely regarded as one of the better engine manufacturers in the world. That is, if you ignore some of their modern snafus, of course. But the S2000 is a celebration of their golden age of design. Back when they were married to McLaren during the late 80s and their glory days of Formula One, where Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna were battling it out. Now, this vehicle is inspired and celebrated from the days of the MP44 and the MP45 race car. In 1994, right around the time of Ayrton Senna's death, Honda released the SSM Open Concept, which was the foundation for this vehicle. They quickly assigned Shigeru Yahara to the project as chief engineer. He was also the chief engineer on the original NSX. He had the opportunity to work with Honda's Formula One team and even Ayrton Senna to help evolve the suspension design and the dynamics of that car. So when he got his hands on this, one of the key things that that team wanted to do was make it an uncompromised driver's car. Some of the things that they had to do on the NSX, making it more accessible to certain people, they did not bother with this. They wanted an open feel. They wanted a pure connection to the driver. And that was kind of the foundation of this car from front to back. In 1999, Honda released this as a 2000 model, the S2000, with a 2-liter naturally aspirated motor. This was everything packaged together to celebrate everything that they've achieved in a street package. It had long sweeping lines, a long front end. Some people said it looked way too feminine, which is why you got this AP2 update in 2004 with more aggressive bumpers, headlight design, LED taillights, and they still kept the price right around $34,000. Now, you got a lot for your money, namely in retrospect to see what you get here, but for the most part, it's aged well. It depends on the color you get, of course, and how you've kept it up. I'm going to shut this door. Now, since I've owned so many of these, I can tell you with certainty that this car's biggest problem is it feels like a rattletrap shit box when you're on the highway. If the top is up, it just feels like a very buzzy space to be in. With the top down, it pretty much, all the wind buffeting and the noise kind of drowns out a lot of the creaks and rattles that you get from the top, the plastics, the wind visor in the back. I mean, this is not a refined space to be in, and I get this question a lot. Could you drive this every day and be happy? And I say the same thing every time. No, I think you have to be definitely in a really good climate year-round where you have sunshine and more good weather to really do that. And there would be some changes I would make to this car to make it streetable that way. Now, here's the biggest negatives that kill this car for most people. Remember, I said they weren't trying to make this accessible to everybody. So if you're a bigger boy or a girl, you're gonna feel like you're suffocating in here. The steering column does not adjust. It is fixed. The seat design is extremely narrow, and I really, honestly, I hate these seats. And you would think, well, just replace it with another seat. Problem is most aftermarket seats don't fit in here very well. And the ones that were kind of designed for this car, they want to bend you over on because, of course, they're ASM or Mugen seats. And then you have to get seat rails from Recaro Japan. So it's just a pain in the ass. If you're not a smaller body type, you might have an issue getting comfortable in here. Or if you just love the car, you're going to make the excuse for it. Now, one of the best parts about the S2000 is driving it as designed with the top down. It is amazing, the open air feeling, and you hear the engine noise, you hear the intake noise. You just become a part of the experience. Now, here's the thing, while the top is extremely convenient, again, if you're a bigger person and you're taller because of the lack of adjustment, when you put this thing up, oh my God, it becomes a nightmare. In fact, I'm not big, but I feel totally uncomfortable driving it with the roof up. You start to feel claustrophobic. Now, I guess you get adjusted to it again, but it's something to note if you're looking at buying something like this. All right, that's enough of that. One of the best things about the S2000 is, like I said, it really is driver-centric. They want everything right here, and that's also the joke of it. It's a very me car, but that's what you want from a driving machine. The second thing about at least the 2000 through 2005 models is you don't have to press any buttons to get going. I don't have to disable traction control, 3 levels of stability control. I don't have to switch it to sport sharp and then adjust 3 different steering things. No. If I want to go kill myself, that's all I have to do is just set off. There's no nannies aside from ABS in here, and that's one of the beautiful things about this car. All the controls are extremely simple. There's no guesswork. Really, there's nothing to do in here but drive. Now, one of the biggest things about developing an uncompromised driver's car is you kind of forget about everything else, and they pretty much have. The storage in here is a joke. Your door pockets might fit a wallet, a phone, the side pocket, the same thing. The cup holders are pretty much useless except for knickknacks, sunglasses, your phone. This armrest area here is extremely difficult to get into, and then of course the upper storage is, that's where most people put their owner's manual. And then you have the trunk. And the trunk that's my biggest problem. It sucks. I mean, I could fit maybe 2 going away bags in there, but you're not gonna fit a spare tire to go to the track, or you're not gonna fit a lot of tools. You basically have to narrow down your accessories to nothing. And you gotta decide whether you could deal with this as a daily driver. Really, this is best owned as a secondary car. Now, there's not much technology on the inside of the S2000, aside from the CD player, the idiotic start button that you actually have to put in a key and turn the key forward to start it, and then you can't stop it with the start button, otherwise you'll grind the starter, and then the digital gauge cluster, which most people think is so cheesy. And I have to agree, I'm not one on pandering to the past. And as an explanation, they just didn't put a digital gauge cluster in here for the cool factor. It's a throwback to the MP45 McLaren F1 car. And it is almost a complete representation of that, and I'll show you a picture here. Well, that is kind of cool. Again, it just doesn't age well, and that's why I bag on modern vehicles for not sticking with just kind of classic design. After 5 to 10 years, this stuff just looks dated, and obviously this is the same story here. All right, that's enough of that. Let's head into the shop and delve into the technical aspects of all the things that make this car great and not so great. You do a
Another Miata.
No. This is a Honda S2000, 2004. Okay? So
Why is it a 2000?
Honda 2000. It's about their...
2000 RPMs that it can take?
No, that's the 2000 micrograms of torque. It has to do with the liters. S2000, 2 liter, even though this no longer has 2 liters, it's got 2.2. But anyway, this, as I said in the start, is one of multiple S2000s I had, and this was the second one that you've seen and molested yourself. I basically looked all over the country. I decided I wanted another one of these after I sold my last one, which was a mistake. And luckily, the guy still has it and he enjoys it.
That's good.
I just saw him at an autocross, and I'm like, everything's the same. He didn't screw with anything. It's just a good stock S2000. So I looked all over and I found one in Reno, Nevada at a dealership. And it was bone stock, no accidents, which is becoming a lot harder to find.
Probably lady driven.
I don't know. No, this is a man's car. And it had low mileage, like 62,000 miles. In 2000, Honda released this vehicle, and the first thing that people noticed was it had an amazing amount of oversteer. And it had a serious problem with bump steer, namely in the rear end. And you drive this even now, and you can't imagine them making a modern car that just would spin and not be controllable. I mean, basically, it had a problem with snap oversteer. So in 2004, the AP2 came out, which is this car, and they made some adjustments. The first thing they did was change the dampers and spring rates. So in the front, you have an increase in spring rates by 6.7%, and the rear was decreased by 10% or 11%, something like that. The sway bars were changed as well, of course, to accommodate that. They changed the tire size from 16 to 17-inch wheels, and the tire compound changed as well because Bridgestone was making the old SO2 and nobody used the SO2, and I'm sure it had a lot to do with the tire compound. So they went to an RE 050 or whatever, 950. I don't remember what the tire was, but it was a Bridgestone compound that stuck around for quite a while. The next thing that Honda did, what was that, Scott?
Slowed down the steering
Why would they do that?
because people don't know how to drive.
Well, in all fairness, it is hard to control a car that's already oversteer prone, and then you have lightning fast steering. It just makes it worse. So they knew this. So the first thing they did was change the steering rack. The ratio is different. They switched it from 13:8 to 14:9. And they also increased the lock-to-lock turns from 2.4 to 2.6. And, you know, a lot of people complained about it. I mean, you just can't make everybody happy.
Never.
So now the car is a lot easier to drive. They also reinforced the bushings with the steering rack so it has a more direct feel, and people argue it still doesn't have a very good steering feel anyway. Now, in terms of the suspension layout, Scott, you have in-wheel double wishbone suspension.
How come they didn't choose aluminum?
Cost back in that time. The Insight had an aluminum body, and it was in the same factory, and the NSX had aluminum components. But I think to get to because this was a $32,000, $34,000 car, and at that price point, I mean, you got a lot for your money, but I don't think they could handle the aluminum costs. So that's why you don't have that. There is a lot of aftermarket support, like WiseFab makes complete aluminum
I've seen
suspension.
that, though. Everything.
It's like $6,000, but it's a race. It's all spherical, everything's adjustable. But the cool part about this car, even though you have cast arms, you have full alignment capability.
That's your dream.
It is quite amazing. There are limitations to how much camber you can get that before it starts affecting tow, as we found out. But you have individual caster adjustment and camber adjustment on the front of this car, which is really nice. And they're cam bolts, and if you keep them nice, they will adjust without seizing up. The next thing you go into is the braking system. And this is kind of a low point of this car, unless you're just street driving. If you're street driving in autocross, these will last forever. And on the track, you're gonna have the argument from people that drive this that will say the brake rotors are so cheap that they'll live with them cracking all the time. You know, you'll get 3 probably track days. If you know how to drive at a real track, you'll get 3 track days before your rotors will explode. If you're more of a novice, you'll probably get 5 or 6 days before you destroy the rotors. And the problem is there's no heat dissipation, there's no cooling, they're 11-inch diameter rotors, and the calipers are single piston. This is kind of a last generation design. The brake feel and the ABS unit for the AP2, they did improve the electronics and the hardware in the ABS module. And as they said, there was more memory available in the programming, so they could add the software some tricks from the first generation, the AP1. So brake pedal feel and the ABS logic is much more suited for hardcore driving. It's biased amazingly to get trail braking. And I've never driven a car besides a Porsche that will trail brake as well as this car does into a turn. In autocross, you get deep into the pedal before that ABS point, the car just rotates. I mean, it just rotates under braking. On the track, you can get the car to turn in under braking, unlike, like I said, most any other car I've been in. Now we're on to the middle part of the car, Scott, and this is a big one. The S2000 transmission. it's notorious for being one of the best feeling gearboxes in the world. Even today, it pretty much stands up, I think, in my opinion, probably the top 5 I've ever driven. And, you know, the first generation gearbox that was in here was one of the most finicky, annoying transmissions you'll ever get into. When it was cold, it would grind for no reason. And I'm gonna show you a quick clip here from a guy that let me use his AP1 video on the track. He goes into the pits, comes out, putting into second gear, and that's what it would do all the time, just randomly for no reason. Could be a combination of the slave cylinder design, the synchromesh or the synchronizer design, and fluid. But for the AP2 generation, they revised the transmission. And the first thing they did was they shortened up all the gears, first through fourth. Fifth was a little bit shorter, I think by 1%, and then sixth was taller. They upgraded the primary gear's brass synchronizer rings to give them a carbon coating, which you can see here. This is done to improve shifting feel and durability, which it's had an obvious effect. Now, AJ has done some video work on the AP2 transmission and rebuilding it, and a lot of this footage you're seeing here is from him. And this transmission, and I've had AP1s and AP2s, this is still flaky sometimes. It's super sensitive to fluid. It's super sensitive to cold. I don't care what you do. You basically have to put this car along until the transmission's heated up before it feels normal. And even on the track, you'll know when it's not happy anymore, because the first thing you'll feel is a gear in a grind into fourth or fifth. And as soon as you feel that, you know the transmission has reached its thermal capacity. But this AP2 transmission is way better than the AP1. And this is one of the big reasons people swap it in if you have an older car. But as great as it feels, it has some durability issues, and you just kind of have to be aware of it. Don't be power shifting this thing, you know, dumping the clutch. And
Dump it, bro. Touch it. Feel how hot the thing is.
It's crazy how hot it gets. The second thing they did is they reinforced the transmission case for the AP2, and there's some other minor changes. The slave cylinder also got a clutch delay valve, and this was partly to save the drivetrain because people were doing 8,000, 9,000 RPM clutch dumps in the AP1, blowing up rear differentials. So people were very unhappy that they put a delay valve in here. And I've driven both, and I appreciate the delay valve because it's that extra layer of protection from driveline shock. The differential is improved on the AP2, which we'll go over in a second. But for the most part, this is pretty much the best thing you're gonna get. If you want one of the more reliable drivetrains, you get an AP2 over an AP1 for a lot of these reasons.
Are they direct bolt-ins, the two of them?
Yes. All right, Scott, we made it to the back, and I just can't believe, and I think I started to say this to you in retrospect, you know, you see a typical mid-cycle refresh when you think, let's change some bumpers, taillights.
Taillights, the headlights.
Yeah, this is so extreme that it pretty much quells the debate of should you get an AP1 or an AP2. So the second thing, or not the second thing, but one of the biggest things they changed was torsional rigidity. It's up about 9% in the front and 10% in the back, and a lot of it is they've added reinforcements in the bulkheads, pieces to reinforce the subframe. They've reinforced the upper A-arms, and there's some other cross brace
And
they
now
put
you
in.
need more after you just ruined it with all these ricer parts you put on.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. The next thing they changed was the way that the rear half shafts and the drive shaft are connected to the differential case to reduce driveline shock. It just might be, and I don't have an AP1 next to me, but it might be the actual part where they're bolted together. But again, they changed that. And one of the biggest things and one of the biggest weaknesses with the S2000 is they upgraded the rear differential, which was considered to be glass. It was probably glass because people were dumping a clutch at insane RPMs. So what they've done with the differential is the case has been reinforced by 40%, and the overall strength of the differential is up by 20%. And it's just different materials. The way that they've made the gear set inside the differential is also different. And you know, with modern fluids that have gotten so good now, back in the day, you'd have to worry about which differential fluid you're going to work with. And now, you know, unless you're stupid, you're not going to blow this up in stock form. So other than that, the last few things to note, the clothing hanger is still here. The Helmholtz resonator to reduce boominess in the exhaust.
You're going to do a pull-up from that?
I could do a pull-up, but I'm afraid I'll tear the exhaust hangers off. So, you know, at the end of the day, there's so much going on here to appreciate. And the last two things to talk about in the back is they did change the brake pad compound for this car because of the suspension changes. They found that the AP1 brake pads faded way too quickly. So the pads are more fade resistant. They do dust a little bit more. And the dampers in the front and the back, they're non-adjustable, obviously, but the rear had a piggyback canister connected to it for, to help with compression. And the reason they needed the canister was there wasn't enough shock travel in the suspension because it is so compact. And one of the reasons why it's so compact is the top. The way that the top floor folds into the trunk space, they had to lower the floor and then to fit a spare tire, it created a more compact rear suspension. So you have problems with rear compression. But just so you know, if you hear there's problems with the compression stroke on S2000 suspension, it's pretty much a design issue with it. But
There's that stupid convertible if they made it a hardtop like it's supposed to be.
Well, the whole concept of the S2000 was an open top car. So I would have loved to see them make a second generation with a hardtop. But, you know, it's still pretty damn good for what it is. Scott, what are we looking at here?
You got a Whopper under the hood here.
Yeah, this is the Tomato.
2.2 liters.
Yeah, of pure performance. And this is what you get with the AP2. Gone is the higher revving 2-liter for a 2.2 that they've stroked out and made some changes to in terms of tuning.
It's a lot of horsepower for that motor for back in the day.
It still is a lot of horsepower for a naturally aspirated car. This one makes 240 horsepower at 7,700 RPMs and 161 pounds of torque at 6,500 RPMs.
That's some serious torques.
Yeah, it's serious torques. And the biggest complaint is people wanted the higher revving motor. They wanted, the AP1 was so popular because you could wind it out. And coming from somebody that has driven the pants off these cars, AP1 and AP2, including on the track, this feels a lot more powerful all the time. Yes, you can't wind it out as much, but those extra RPMs don't make up for the fact this has more grunt. And, you know, we're only talking about 10 pounds of torque or whatever, but it's just consistent over the rev range all the way till you hit the fuel cutoff. It's making power. And the main reason that Honda did this is, I believe, for reliability. They said that this helps to consume less oil, and people say that both motors consume a lot of oil. All four of the cars that I've had, this is the only one that has burned a little bit more oil than the other ones. And a lot of it is because I'm wide open, flat out on the track a lot more than the other cars were. So, you know, any car you drive on the track, like, you're gonna burn oil. It's just the way physics work with engine design. But some of these cars will burn more oil on the street than others. And it depends on what type of oil you use as well. The other things you're gonna notice, the map sensor. They've made a manufacturing improvement by putting a zip tie around it.
That's like version 1.01.
Yeah, and it works. So if you don't have the zip tie, add one. It's like $3 from the dealership. The next thing is the intake manifold. It has a throttle cable for the AP2 still up until 2005. And the thing that they changed with the AP2 is gives you a 10% heavier pedal feel in the accelerator. And this was to reduce throttle inputs during steady state turns, because in the AP1 it was so twitchy to rotate that you just breathe on the throttle and it would, you know, help you to spin it out. So they've softened the throttle mechanically. They've softened the suspension.
Harden the throttle.
Harden the throttle, but soften the input.
Well, right, but you can feel it even right here, the spring tension.
I know. It's just funny how they did things before you had all the software. And in 2006 they went to drive-by-wire. The other thing is the intake design, cone air filter. And even today, as much as, yes, it's kind of sucking in hot air from the radiator, this is still a really good design for a factory airbox, despite how much space it takes up. And really, after that, I mean, it's just little tweaks here and there. You know, you have a low center of gravity because of the double wishbone suspension. They're able to get the hood lower. The engine is placed mid-rear. So you have 50-50.
That's legit right there.
That is legit. 50-50 weight distribution. And with the adjustable suspension, I have the cross balance 50% too. So that's one of the things and one of the reasons why this car drives so good. But let's stop talking about it. Let's get out there and take this thing for a drive. Getting behind the wheel of the S2000, and I'm gonna revert directly to a regular car reviews where they talked about the S2000 being full of all this potential that will never be achieved. People make more about this car than it really is. And I'm gonna say this, it's not a race car, it's not a high-end sports car, it's not incredibly quick or even fast. It's just one of those cars. In order to get its full capability, you have to push yourself as a driver. If you're not driving this at 9 or 10 tenths, then you are not experiencing what this vehicle is all about. Now, Honda has had homecoming events for owners of S2000s and NSX, and Shigeru Uehara, the chief engineer, has been a part of those long after his retirement. He's shown up to them, he does recorded videos to tell owners how grateful he is that people still drive these cars and how special it really is and the driving experience. And you don't see that too often. And Japanese cars are pretty much any car anymore. And I think that's one of the special things about this. You know that Honda, this was a special car for Honda. It was a special car for the people that were involved in making it. And it's been an extremely enjoyable car for the people that still own it and cherish it. Now, you know, it's not gonna be for everybody, and I'm not gonna kid you there. You know, you get into higher performance modern sports cars and you get in here, you really have to drive it on a track to understand why it's so good. On the street, you know, I drove with Scott and he's like, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but really, this is kind of a waste driving it around every day. It feels, and it's the same thing they said when it came out, driving it every day feels like a Civic, you know, a little bit souped up Civic. It just has no torque. It's got no instant gratification that a lot of modern 4-cylinders have with turbos, or your V6s and V8s. You have to absolutely whine the piss out of it. One of my favorite parts about driving the S2000 is the open top experience, and I said that on the interior segment of this car. And there's something to be said with the engine sound. A lot of modern cars don't have this high revving, naturally aspirated sound. You have to go into much more expensive cars to get this experience anymore. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about it as well. You feel so connected, even though you're not going you're not going fast. You get the sense, you get this really high sense of speed in the corners with the engine, the transmission, the suspension design. And let's talk about suspension for a minute. The stock suspension on the S2000 was incredibly well set up, especially with the AP2. The AP1 was extremely edgy. And now, you know, this is more sedate, this is more controllable and drivable. I'd say if you're using this as a feeder car to learn how to drive, then you want to keep it almost completely stock, aside from maybe tires and, well, of course, an alignment, because you can do that with this car, and learn how to drive it fast stock. I've been through so many autocrosses with this car, bone stock for years, where I'd go and massacre people with a countless number of modifications, and they would come up to me and be like, how is your S2000 fast like this? And it has nothing to do with the car being fast. It has everything to do to understand how it drives. And the suspension is a little bit over dampened in stock form. You know, it gives you that kind of bouncy feeling. It's very reactive, and it can upset the car over bumps even with the AP2. You don't have to oversteer the wheel. You get almost zero understeer in this car. And the same thing goes from any type of turn you're taking. You could take any corner and this car just wants to rotate through it without you having to overwork the steering. And once you learn how to work with the rotation, that's what makes this car so amazing in terms of rear wheel drive. And I love the fact with the 2000 to 2005 models all the way through there, you don't have traction or stability control. And granted, yeah, you can, it's a one touch off on the newer cars, but this is, again, one thing I love is the pure driving aspect of it. And there's just not much else out there like it anymore. Final thoughts on the Honda S2000. Now, believe it or not, given the length of this video, I've had to leave out a ton of detail. And I'm gonna break this into 3 parts. The second part being more of a buyer's guide, all the things that were changed and things to look out for. The third part is kind of my experience with modifying this car and driving it a little bit harder. So you have that to look forward to if you like the vehicle, and if you don't like it, well, too bad for you. Now, let's get into the pros and cons. The pros are, this has gotta be one of the most reliable sports cars ever made. You can go drive it hard, you can take it to a track, an autocross with minimal modifications, and really not have that much to worry about. And the things you do have to worry about are mostly remedied through maintenance or just extra care. The other huge pro is this has one of the best 4-cylinder performance motors ever made. And again, a lot of that has to do with reliability. And the other part is that it revs out and it sounds so wonderful doing so. It has one of the best manual transmissions ever made, despite some of the quirks. It feels and drives like nothing else. And you can go modify a bunch of cars, you will never get it to feel like an S2000. And you know, I look at this car in retrospect and I think, you know, there's really 4 cars or 5 cars that I really enjoy, and they just stretch out in price. The S2000 is one of the most rewarding, affordable used cars you're ever gonna own, besides maybe a Miata. Then you have to step up to something like a GT350 Shelby, a Porsche GT3, an Ariel Atom, or a Ferrari 458 before they went to turbocharging. And this kind of combines a lot of the elements of all those cars. But the biggest thing is how much it communicates with you. You get behind the wheel of this car, if you know how to drive it, you know how to push your limits with it, and you can stay ahead of it. The way that it rotates, the way it gets through corners, you can forget about that it's not the fastest car because of the way that it makes you feel driving it on the street or in a performance manner. And again, that is one of the huge highlights of it. Now, the negatives of the S2000 are pretty simple. Well, it's older, you know, you can't get a warranty on it. Parts are going to be more scarce over time. The transmission, namely on the AP1s, were extremely flaky. The AP2 trans is much better, but you just have to take some care to it. Do your maintenance regularly with fluid changes. Most of the updates they've made have made it more reliable, but the car has horrible aerodynamics, and you can talk to anybody that's done any track driving, and that's why you find these cars with huge wings on them, ridiculous body kits, and it really is, when you get out on track, the rear bumper parachutes, the airflow underneath isn't that smooth. It's just an older car. They didn't focus on that back in the day. So if you're not track driving, you may not even notice that. The second negative is, well, the interior space. You can't fit a bigger person in the car. When I'm talking bigger, usually over 6 foot, or you have longer legs, you don't have the adjustability in the car, or if you're, you know, kind of blobbing out and you're just gonna be suffocated in there. And, you know, again, it's not the most accessible car. And while it may be one of the best sports cars, it's definitely not the easiest to own. And that's the other thing. This is not a car that is particularly rewarding to drive every day. It's more of a weekend car. And if you have bad weather, well, you know, you're gonna wanna think twice about buying this, because there's other performance cars or sports cars that might put a smile on your face more to drive every day without all the sacrifices of the interior space. Kind of last but not least is I've bought and sold, again, 4 of these cars. And you're gonna ask, well, why the hell did I get rid of the original ones? And I'm gonna tell you, back when I was younger, I honestly thought that there would be something better than this that came out. I thought Honda would better this car. I thought Toyota or Nissan or Ford or one of the other manufacturers would take this formula and elevate it. And so far, the only company to continue being dedicated to that car or a car like it is the Miata. Mazda is committed to that car. They've evolved it, they've re-engineered it, they've perfected it, and they continue to perfect it. And a company like Honda, it's just a toy for them. It's a celebration, it's a trophy. Hey, look what we can do, but now we're not gonna do it anymore. And that's one of the big disappointments of the S2000. And one of my biggest fears is you have all the formula in this car. You have people that are buying them for crazy amounts of money because you can't get anything like it. Everything is there, the bits and pieces, to teach Honda a lesson for what they need to do going forward with remaking a car like this. But given their history with cars like the NSX, the new one, the CRZ, and some of their performance attempts, they just don't listen to the people that love their older cars. And a lot of it has to do with the engineers that worked on it are all retired. The management that kind of supported these projects are gone. The younger generations come in, different mentalities, and that's why we're never going to see a car like this S2000 again. And while that's a sad, sad reality of it, it's also a great thing if you like this car, own it, take care of it, and enjoy it for what it is. A affordable, reliable, just fun and enjoyable car to drive.
Above all though, and I have mentioned this before, please take care of your S2000. Keep it by your side for a long time. Enjoy it from the bottom of your heart, and continue to share the quality and the legacy of the S2000 with many friends, so the legend of the S2000 never ends.